intake, if I were to sum it up in a couple of sentences, it's your ability to respond, it's your ability to qualify, it's your ability to follow up, and it's your ability to sign cases. And if you can do all those four things really well, then your intake process is probably pretty strong. Unfortunately, the reality is law firms fall very short in doing each of those things very well.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
We're here with Gary Falkowitz of Intake Conversion Experts. How are you doing today, Gary?
I am excellent. Thanks for having me today, guys.
And of course, I have my co-host here, Ryan Klein. How's it going, Ryan?
I'm doing well. Your enthusiasm is palpable, and I appreciate it. I'm sure the listeners do too.
I'm excited. I'm down in Florida. I usually reside in Austin, so I'm the sunshine's making me very happy.
Yeah, for good reason.
Yeah. So today we're super excited to talk to you today, Gary. We know you have a huge, extensive background in the legal space, and your current company, Intake Conversion Experts, focuses on intake for lawyers. So I guess really starting off, tell our listeners a little bit about your background, how you got into the legal space, and then specifically how you got into the intake space.
I've been practicing law for almost 15 years. I remember getting a BlackBerry when starting my position as an associate, and all of a sudden we were getting all these leads throughout the day, overnight, and the weekends, and I had no idea. Law school didn't prepare me for this aspect of the industry, for being involved in a personal injury business, as well as being an attorney at the law firm. And I was so intrigued that I had reached out to my boss at the time, to Jared Parker, and I informed him, or I should say I shared with him my interest of getting more involved in the business side of things. I was intrigued by what went into generating all of these leads, how the law firm handled these leads, things of that nature. And I was really wet behind the ears a little bit. I really had no idea what the process entailed. And when I talked to him about this and my interest, he sort of looked at me and said, all right, that's very nice, but please go back to your office and continue to do what I paid you to do, right? And luck has it, or talent has it, or hard work has it. But about a couple years later, I was promoted to a managing attorney of the intake department at that firm. And it was there where I really got a strong understanding of the marketing dollars that were being spent, the process that was being applied, and the results of all of that. I managed the intake department. I ended up going on TV as the face of the firm for over a year, and I also managed the referral process. So I got a good understanding about how other law firms were handling their intake processes. And what hit me the hardest was that we as an industry, we as personal injury lawyers, were leaving so much money on the table at intake, yet we were still successful. So I ended up leaving the law firm a few years later, started my own consulting practice, which is something I do for many law firms throughout the country, something I'll do until the day I retire, I'm sure. In addition to opening up my own consulting practice, I opened up my own referral practice. And then more importantly, and something that takes up the majority of my time, is I partnered up with owners of an intake software company known as Captora. And we opened up Intake Conversion Experts, which is an outsourced intake department. We have two arms to it. It's a call center. It's a call center on steroids, I like to say. There are two arms to the company. There's your general answering service, and then there's your retention department, where we've worked with over 300 law firms and retained more than 30,000 cases on behalf of those law firms nationwide. So I'm involved in intake and have been for the last 10 years of my career. And it's something that I am constantly focusing on a daily basis.
Those are some serious numbers. Yeah, and it gets into tens of thousands. You're probably the real deal when it comes to this stuff. So, we were discussing a few conversation topics before we started, and now I probably have 20 more. But not to get too off topic, one thing I do want to start with is the difference between what you do for these law firms. So I see, I was looking at your website and read about your background. I know about the client acquisition part, the intake there. I'm kind of interested to know more about the client experience part. So people retain you to do more of the post sign up work as well?
So they will contact me really for one of two reasons. One is they'll say, Gary, I'm having a hard time with my intake department right now. I'm spending X amount of dollars, and I'm not sure that we are maximizing the return on that marketing investment. And I'm quite sure that I'm leaving some money on the table. Can you come into my firm for 1, 2, 3 days and help us figure out where our holes are? And that's something I do both in an in-person fashion as well as remotely for multiple law firms that want me to stay on board. That's one reason law firms will contact me. The other reason is to use my call center. And really, when they call me for that reason, it's because they want to spend a significant amount of money marketing, and they know that they don't have the resources in-house to handle the intake. Now, when I say intake, it's this one word that, by the way, if you told me in law school or even right after law school that I'd be somehow so intimately involved in intake, I would have had no idea what you were referring to. But I will tell you right now that intake, if I were to sum it up in a couple of sentences, it's your ability to respond, it's your ability to qualify, it's your ability to follow up, and it's your ability to sign cases. And if you can do all those four things really well, then your intake process is probably pretty strong. Unfortunately, the reality is law firms fall very short in doing each of those things very well.
Yeah, definitely. I know, our background is we help lawyers get new cases online. And so I know a lot of times we'll have a conversation with a lawyer, like, hey, I called them back one time. So on that point, when you have your call center following up on, let's say, a web form lead, what's that process like? Is it just a phone call? Is it an email? Is it a text message?
Yeah. So first I'll say I want to commiserate with you for a moment, guys, because I was in the shoes of being an attorney at a law firm and calling up marketers and basically screaming that you guys aren't doing a good job. We're not getting good cases. We're not signing a lot of cases. And then I know, from working with many marketers right now that will recommend their law firms to work with my intake company, I know that you guys are probably thinking, well, it's not us. We're getting you the phone calls. We're getting you the leads. You guys aren't following up fast enough. You're not following up for a long enough period of time. So I totally have a strong understanding of both sides of that coin. But to answer your question, when it comes to web leads, your ability to immediately respond, and by the way, I'm not even sure if I'm answering your question anymore. I got off on a tangent, so I apologize. but your ability to immediately respond to web leads is probably the first most important factor in trying to get that lead to become a client. But do me a favor, ask me that question again so I actually answer. There's not a specific okay, on Wednesdays at 7:15, you're going to have a 98% conversion rate. It's not like that. Although I just use the term conversion rate, and I think it's interesting that marketers and lawyers really should use it a little bit differently. I know from a marketing standpoint, you might be converting. What's your percentage of converting that lead to a retainer? But when it comes to intake, what you really need, the metric that you really need to use when you use the term conversion rate is, of all the cases that qualified, how many of those cases ultimately retained? That's how you can really judge your intake. And by the way, not trying to push my book at all, but I also wrote a book called The Complete Guide to Law Firm Intake, which talks about all the things that you guys and I are talking about today on this podcast. But to answer your question, it's not, first of all, you have to respond fast. And then you have to respond frequently. And whether, to the extent that you're able to send out a text or send out an email, of course you should. Should you respond more than once on the first day? Of course you should. Can you leave more than one message on the first day? Of course you should. And in terms of how long you do it for, I'll say it this way. I'll say until you're told not to, or until you go an extended period of time with no response. The thing about our industry is that overall, the return on investment, the profit margins are fantastic. If you look at your cost per generating a lead or your cost per acquiring a retainer, and you compare that to the fee that you ultimately are able to earn at the end of the case, it's 10 times better than what the stock market gives to you. Sometimes it's 1,000 times better. Sometimes it's not even computable, if that's a word, because your cost per generation was $0 and you made $150,000 on that case. So how do you can't even figure out what your return on investment really was. So what I really, this opportunity for the three of us to sit down and talk for a few minutes, what I think is really important is for law firms and lawyers and intake specialists and even marketers, for everyone to understand how competitive of an industry this really is. When I present at conferences or I present at law firms, something that I want to make very clear is that if you want to maximize results, you have to make an assumption. And that assumption is that the claimant that reached out to your law firm has also reached out to 2 other law firms. So what can you do that will put your firm in a better position to convert that lead into a retained client? Now, I'll tell you, there's a terrible assumption that's going around that I hear other lawyers talk about when I consult them or they're thinking about using my company, that can be very risky. And that's this. When you assume that a claimant contacted you because they want to hire you, you then take your foot off of the gas, and that can put you in a very vulnerable position. But if you assume that the claimant contacted you because they're considering you, you now go into sales mode. And if you're in sales mode, you realize that you have to do a bunch of things on that call. You have to reassure that claimant. You have to potentially get a lawyer on the call. You have to explain to the caller the benefits of signing with your law firm. You have to respond fast. You have to convey interest, and a host of other things. But if you realize that you're actually competing against other law firms, you're going to leave your best cards on the table. And I think that it's really costly if you're going to assume that a claimant contacted you because they only want your law firm. Because in reality, that's not necessarily the case.
That's a definitely interesting point. And that definitely happens. And what I see the most, and you do feature this specifically on your website with mass tort, because people are getting inundated, and I'm sure you know, you deal with the mass tort right now. You have your 3M, you have your Roundup, and you probably have a few others, of course. And those are people that I know that are more likely to be like, well, I got inundated, I got hit here with an ad, I'll contact them, maybe they can help me. And then they click on like a Facebook, an ad or organic, and then they are reaching out to 3 or 4 people. So that kind of leads me to kind of a related question to doing the follow-up, and maybe in a situation where a law firm really is doing a good job with intake and follow-ups, is the phone etiquette. And I'm very interested about that because I haven't really heard too much feedback on how that plays out. So even if a law firm is fantastic with their intake process, if their phone etiquette is trash, I'm sure that could affect, the results of them signing up. So can you go more into details about what phone etiquette it is from your experience?
Yeah, I certainly can. So first and foremost, stop worrying about asking a claimant where they heard of you or how they heard of you. That's an ego play. I know it's also a metric play, but these calls are coming from people that most likely have never needed to call a personal injury lawyer in the past. So the first thing you have to do is you have to calm them down. You have to make them feel like they did the right thing by calling. And those are the words you can use also. Thank you for calling. You did the right thing by calling. We handle cases like this every single day. The sooner you provide that reassurance language, the more relaxed they become and the more comfortable they become in sharing the information of their experience with you. So reassurance is at the top of the list. The next thing is compassion. You have to, too often, and I've listened to thousands of phone calls on behalf of my clients when I consult with them. And I sometimes provide analyses on those phone calls. I can't tell you how often intake specialists or lawyers or paralegals or receptionists, unfortunately, are so robotic that they don't realize that when somebody tells them that they have this terrible or serious injury, even if it's not a serious injury, they jump right into another question. They're not providing any compassion to this claimant. And again, if you assume that this claimant is considering other options, you then need to understand that the relationship you build with this claimant is potentially either going to strengthen the potential of having him or her sign with your law firm or weaken that potential. A strong piece of advice here is the moment a claimant conveys their injury to you, you have to stop what you're doing for a few seconds, provide some compassion. And by the way, you can follow that compassionate statement with a reassuring statement. So we talked about compassion. We have to thank the caller for calling. We talked about reassurance. Here's a big one for you guys. And it's not so much the etiquette as much as it is the process. We need to make decisions on that first call, and we need to empower our staff to make those decisions. The more that we tell claimants we need to review their case or their fact pattern, and we're going to get back to them, and we're going to investigate it, and we're going to talk to a lawyer, and we're going to give you a call back, the more you put yourself in a position of potentially losing that claimant. The interest level that I have is highest when I contact that gym. Afterwards, after I meet with their people and I look at the equipment they have and that whole thing and their whole sales pitch, I go back to reality. I go back to my normal responsibilities. I have businesses. I have a family. I have other things that I have to take care of. And I get distracted by life to think about necessarily the need to go back to the gym, although we all know that if I went there on day 1, I probably should be considering it in day 3, day 7, day 15 as well. What happens all too often is that as a law firm, we make the assumption that, hey, we called the claimant 3 times. They haven't called us back. They must not be interested. That assumption is a terrible assumption to make. If a claimant needs you on the first day, they're going to need you on the 3rd day. The problem is this. Their interest level may have decreased because life has distracted them. We need to remind them that they can benefit from hiring a lawyer and potentially getting some money for their injury. So I think that we as an industry quit too soon.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about the follow-ups. I mean, even our clients, our clients are very savvy. We put these kinds of things in front of them, like automation and being able to like follow up via email, text, and email, and phone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be surprised if most law firms are maybe probably 1 or just 2. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority.
I've seen it. Not at all. I've seen it.
As far as like law firms, so let's say a law firm is interested in knowing more about like their internal process, with the reception, what their intake process is like, and if they're actually dissuading people from, taking the next step with the law firm. What's really the easiest way for them to kind of audit their own system? Would it be just recording calls or making them follow a script, or is there something else? All
the above, plus. Recording calls is fantastic for quality assurance. I will tell you right now that I could probably count on one hand of the thousands of calls that I've heard. I could probably count on one hand where I have not one recommendation for a better intake call. And that's not to say that they're all terrible. Quite frankly, many of them were fantastic. But when you listen to calls, what you realize is that there's always room for improvement. So to the extent that you're able to listen to those calls and you have the resources to listen to those calls, and you have the resources to analyze them and share that feedback with your team, that's tremendous. It's something I do from a consulting standpoint. I think it's huge. I think that scripting is really important as well. You don't want your staff to improvise too much and to make up questions that may not be relevant or may actually be wasting time. I think accountability is on top of the list. You need a process. You need a process in place. You need to ensure that your team is following that process. You need to reward your team when they're following the process and the results are strong. You also need to let them know when the process is not being followed. And this is quite too often, there's no accountability manager. There's no one making sure that there is a process and that process is being followed. So I think what's interesting, if there's anything that I'd like to take a little bit of credit for over the last few years, and it's not even, forget expertise and ego and all the other crap. I try to stay away from all that. But I really enjoy bringing to the forefront that this is an issue, that this is something law firms need to start focusing on more, because it's okay to be profitable, but isn't it better to maximize profits? And that's where intake comes into play. Because, if you get 10 lawyers in the room and you give them the same fact pattern, you'll get 10 different estimates on what that case is worth. So it's hard to sort of say, here's the process for how to litigate a case and maximize the value of that case. However, it's not as hard to put resources in to maximize the return on your marketing investments. And for whatever reason, law firms have not invested enough time or energy or resources in that aspect of their business.
So Gary, I have one question that I'm sure a lot of lawyers are going to have based on intake, and obviously based on the value that you've conveyed and how important intake is. So if a lawyer was looking to hire an intake specialist, either in-house or hire a company similar to yours, what kind of background do you look for when you're looking to hire someone internally at your call center? Like, what kind of skills do they need to have? Specific legal experience?
So I think legal experience is always a plus. Knowing the subject matter of what you're working with is always a step ahead of the game. It's not necessary, though. I think phone experience is always a plus, because all too often you'll hire somebody and they don't realize what it means to be on the telephones all day, whether it's outbound calls or taking inbound calls, calling up web leads. So those two are definitely a plus. I think compassion. You have to speak to these people on the phone first and see how compassionate they are. If they're compassionate, that's going to be a plus. And then lastly, I'll say that they need to be driven by results. They need to understand what metrics they're being judged by. I think that's an issue with most jobs. I think the expectation is not set appropriately sometimes. And that goes for intake specialists. Sometimes it goes for lawyers, and it goes for many other jobs. I think when you tell a new hire, here are the metrics that are most important to us, and here's what we're going to judge your value to us by. That helps, because then they get to focus on maximizing their own metrics. So I think those are some of the things that you have to keep an eye out for. Everything else, I've seen people who have no legal experience, no phone experience, and they're fantastic. I've some of them that I have right now in my office. And then I've seen people that have had great legal experience and great phone experience, and just intake wasn't for them. So there's no secret to this, but those are some of the ideas that we look for.
One thing about the person that's in charge of intakes, when you think about it, is they're the first person a potential client interacts with. So if you really hone in on that, you're like, this person literally is the first person to represent my company besides what they saw online. So that can be a little bit stressful. If you put it that way.
It's a powerful position, right? You just said why. This is the person that people are going to judge your law firm and your lawyers by. So it better be some great window shopping going on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And before our last question, I just want to say thanks again for coming on. This has been very, very insightful for us, and especially for lawyers that are going to be listening to this podcast, and podcast after podcast. They're just like, man, everything is wrong with my law firm. Where do I even start? Because ultimately, I think that's, the goal of this is to also put people or lawyers on a track to improving their law firms from branding and recognition and business development, marketing, all that kind of stuff, but also kind of expose some things that maybe they've been putting off for too long. That being said, if a lawyer was interested, okay, I got to do something about intake, I feel like there's an issue, and you had to tell a law firm just one thing that they could do to get at least on track or to improve their intake process, what do you think that would be?
If I had to tell a law firm one thing
just
to improve their intake practice, I would say start with the assumption that the person that's calling you spoke with two other law firms, and now use your imagination on what you can do better than two other law firms.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great point, because that just opens up for everything, and it completely changes the mindset and how they view that position.
Yeah, we all do better when we know that we have competitors out there.
Yep. Short and sweet, but highly meaningful. But yeah, thanks again. You have plenty of speaking engagements. Is that correct?
I do. I love speaking engagements. I think that again, I'm bringing more noise to the topic, which I think is important. And I'm staying busy with this stuff, guys. I'm shoulder deep in it. I love to talk about it. If any of your listeners ever want to discuss intake in general, have some questions, they can reach out to me anytime. If they're interested in outsourcing their general answering service, or they want to run a mass tort campaign, and they want us to do the intake and the follow-up, we could do that. If they want me involved in consulting, I could do that. Really, any intake questions out there, I'm sure it could be helpful.
Do you have like people come to you and they're like, okay, I'm going all in for Roundup. I'm going to drop about $1 million on or more on television, radio, and AdWords. You are able to gear up 5, 10, 15 people at once to dedicate their time to that?
Yeah, 100%. We're doing it now.
Yeah,
So,
I'd assume that. I figured I was just reiterating what's already happening.
And Gary, what's the best way people can get a hold of you?
I would say email. I mean, I have multiple email addresses, but if you want to go to Gary at intakeconversion.com or Gary at maxintake.com, those are two of the best ways to get in touch with me.
We want to give the listeners the super special email that you respond to within 5 seconds.
Yeah, I'm pretty good regardless, I promise.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks again. I know that after we publish this one, we're going to be forwarding this to all of our clients, halfway, to improve what they have for the intake process, and half maybe what you mentioned before, like, hey, listen, we're doing our best bringing high quality leads, but at the end of the day, you guys have to sign them up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep.
Well, let's stay in touch, guys. However I can help you or your clients, it would be my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.